Welcome back to Developing and Leading Teams. In this session, we're going to look at mission team ministry and look at some of the key principles of team ministry and some tools that can be used to help to build mission teams. So let's take it up again with the Gospel of Luke, and we'll this time go to Luke chapter 9. So let's look at the first few verses of Luke chapter 9. When Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. He told them, "Take nothing for the journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra tunic. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that town as a testimony against them." So they set out and went from village to village, preaching the gospel and healing people everywhere. So after a period of time, allowing the 12 disciples to observe what he was doing and beginning to teach them, Jesus gave them power and authority over demons and diseases and sent them out to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. So you notice there he's really giving them clear instructions about what they are to do, very much like a mission statement. No doubt they were a little apprehensive, very apprehensive about this, and would have been able to come up with all sorts of reasons why it wasn't a good idea. Money, travel arrangements, suitable clothing, accommodation, and food, for starters. Jesus simply told them not to bother about any of these things. So he took away all of their excuses, really, and they probably had plenty, as we all do, when we are confronted with the challenge of actually doing something in response to what God may be calling us to do. Now, we do notice that Jesus qualified that a little bit later on. We find that in Luke chapter 22. So let's just have a little quick look at that. In verse 35, then Jesus asked them, "When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" "Nothing," they answered. He said to them, "But now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, 'And he was numbered with the transgressors,' and I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment." So Jesus did qualify what he said, knowing that it's not going to be always smooth sailing. When he sent them out the first time, he really taught them a lesson that they need not to be worried too much about accommodation and all the normal excuses that we would come up with for not doing something. But he said that he was to suffer, and we will suffer also too, because things are not always going to go in accordance to God's plan for us, because there is a battle going on and we're engaged in that battle. So with all their concerns taken away from them, off they went, preaching the gospel and healing people everywhere. When they came back, Jesus took them on a retreat to a place called Bethsaida for some debriefing. People heard where they were and went and followed them. He welcomed them, he taught them about the kingdom of God, and healed those who needed to be healed. When they all started getting hungry, a huge logistical problem developed for the disciples, and they asked him to send them all away to find food. He simply told them to feed them themselves. They objected due to a lack of resources. He then asked them to arrange the people in groups of 50. He looked up to heaven. He blessed the 5 loaves and 2 fish that they had, and he asked the disciples to pass them around. None of their fears were realized. He fed them, and they were all fed, and they all were satisfied. Then Jesus went on to make sure that they knew who he was. before he told them that he was going to be killed and raised to life. You see that in chapter 9, verse 22. He then promised something not too well understood by our culture, that those who lose their life for his sake will find it. After a few days to think about this, he took Peter, John, and James with him to a mountain to pray. They experienced something of his amazing glory and some further confirmation from the Father, ending with the words, "Listen to him." So Jesus took Peter, John, and James, sort of his close circle of disciples, up to the mountain of transfiguration and revealed himself to them, revealed his glory to them. And we hear again, like we heard at Jesus' baptism, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased." And he ended with the words, this time, "Listen to him." So clearly, the call on Peter, James, and John, and all the disciples to come after that, were to listen to Jesus. So in this passage, we learn some important things about mission team ministry. Missions defined by a clear mission statement. Central to the mission that Jesus had was the proclamation of the good news and the ministry of healing. Mission takes precedence over money, travel, accommodation, etc. Jesus is able to resource what he asks us to do as we contribute what we can. Training involves teaching, mentoring, and coaching. Self-denial and suffering are part of the cost of discipleship. Mountaintop experiences may also happen, but what is most important is that we spend time in prayer and we ask God and we listen to what Jesus has to say to us about what he wants us to do. And as we do that, that sharpens our vision for what we're doing and our direction in what we're doing. Now, in your manual, you have a checklist of some of the things that might be helpful in terms of organising mission teams. Things we need to think about. We won't always get them perfect, but in order to develop and maintain the kind of focus that you'll need, these things will keep you on track. And it's really important that every member of the team has a clear understanding of what is envisaged in terms of what they will accomplish. If we don't have a clear vision and a clear understanding of it, people will go off in all sorts of different directions. And we'll have all sorts of issues which we wouldn't necessarily have if we didn't have a proper vision, mission statement in mind. So it needs to be concise, usually one sentence for the mission statement. When other issues begin to cloud out the main purpose of the team, leaders will all need to bring members to refocus on what they're essentially doing. Then a vision statement is helpful. The vision statement is a little bit longer. This vision statement can spell out in more detail, maybe 3 or 4 sentences, what it is hoped the team might accomplish. It needs to leave some room for God's provision and not to be too restrictive. So don't make it too specific. But we also need to remember that God can intervene and change things around and modify things a little bit in the process. Scope is important. It's important to understand who is intended to be reached by this ministry, and it will help to prevent the team from becoming involved in too many outside things that are outside of the scope. So it's important to think about just how broad we're meant to be going with this team. And some strategic objectives will help, which describe the steps that we need to take in order to accomplish the mission. They should be reality tested, specific, measurable, and achievable. So what are the things that we are going to achieve? What are the goals? And we need to spell them out specifically. And then you have some thoughts about how the team might be structured in terms of defining some principal task groups that you might need to accomplish the mission. So you might need a prayer and planning group to pray about the vision, the mission, and the scope and the objectives, and write them down so that they will continually be there to undergird what you're doing, and also to keep undergirding what you're doing with prayer. Communication and promotion. This group will need to develop a checklist relating to the mission and how it will be communicated, and how will activities be advertised in the community, and how it will be made known to people who it plans to reach. Catering and hospitality. Group will need to organise whatever is needed to cater for those involved in the mission. Don't be too daunted by that. Remember Jesus' teaching about going out and not necessarily having to worry about those things, because God will provide. Presentation and small groups. This group will need to develop the presentation of sessions and mentor those involved in leading or assisting with the small groups that may be involved. Clearly, team members will need to be involved in areas related to their gifting, which will need to be assessed by people who are developing the team. A system of matching trained gifted leaders with potential leaders in each of the areas will ensure that the ministry can continue to multiply. So this concept can be multiplied if we are continually training and mentoring others to do the areas and work in the areas that we're working in. Then we need to think about the team selection procedure. In selecting the team, we need to look at how people are going to be invited to join the team, and whether or not an interview process is needed, or use of forms to fill out, or whatever. Then we'll need to develop some team training, a package which can be implemented depending on the skills of those who are participating and the skills needed to accomplish the mission. And we'll need to think about logistics, organisational tasks that facilitate the mission, and the finance, and an operational time frame, how it's going to be financed, and what are the necessary completion times for each designated task that will need to be established, and that can be very helpful to make sure you get there. So all of these things will be helpful to help us keep on track as a team and accomplish the mission that we are working to bring about.